Hey everyone, and welcome back to DC MotorWerks. Today is going to be a little different video as we are hosting the Mercedes-Benz Club of America Peachtree section and the surrounding sections for this weekend's festivities of what's called Star Summit. And our participation here is all about AMGs. Whether you have a pre-merger AMG or you have your 113 era, your 156 era, the 157 and beyond. I know that's a lot of technical stuff. So sit back, relax, grab some popcorn, grab your favorite drink, and enjoy the technical talk.
So without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce Cameron and Andy. Guys, you got the floor.
We're also known as Candy. We are one. I'm Cameron, this is Andy, or Candy, or just say hey, whatever, you know. But we want this to be interactive. We've kind of cobbled together some different eras of AMG, from pre-merger to merger and modern and full of everything, just about. Feel free to interrupt us. I don't want to be the only one talking up here, nor does Andy. This is what would be considered a pre-merger car. So before, which Ruby can probably correct me, about 96. Back in these days, AMG was essentially just like, kind of like us, a small outfit. Because you never know what you're going to get. Because they all got different options. Everyone had different budgets. Sometimes you just got the big motor and nothing else. No interior bits, no extended wood or anything like that. This one is a European 117 engine, so it is high compression, a little different than what we have here. But it mostly just got a body kit. It has some pieces on the interior as the, what do you call the center box?
Just like it's the label wood.
We just call it a box. Yeah, the wood box. And if y'all want to interact and walk around, you don't have to just hide behind there. But if you want to check it out, by all means. It is a blue on blue, which is a very 80s spec, with the Aero 1 monoblocks on it. But on this one, we've kind of gone through everything on it. It got full suspension rebuild, full exhaust, and the gentleman that owns it wants everything to be squeaky perfect. So it has been a long-term project here, as most pre-merger AMGs tend to be, which I'm sure some of these gentlemen can attest to. Is these cars are older. You know, this is what, 40 years old, people close. So they need things, and like I said, you never know what you're going to get with these. Everyone is kind of different. So that makes it challenging. So if you are looking for one of these, just keep that as an open mind. If you look at more than one, they're not going to be the same. So
what about in terms of like options packages? Like, how did that work? You know, and like the a la carte thing.
It pretty much all was, wasn't it? Like, I mean, it was just, what did you want? It's kind of what they're...
They give you a catalog and you just check based on how much money you have.
Yeah, like I said, a lot of them were the old hot rod style. They're like, I want the big motor and nothing else. And some people, like this one, it was mostly just body kit and so forth. It's a factory European engine. But
is there any records of the given car weight has, or is that something that you have to sort of piece together by taking it?
So personally, I may be a little jaded. Pre-merger cars are very frustrating to me because it's just kind of all up in the air, you know.
The answer is no.
So,
there is.
Yeah, you know, it's kind of like I said, small outfit, you know, and Rentec, he knows that he has a particular car that he's struggled with. I know, not to pick at him, but even then, you talk to Rentec, it's 20 years later, they're like, you don't know what we did, you know. So there's not a whole lot of record keeping. I know, I forget what the actual like option code, which was somewhat of a thing, because it just meant that it went straight from the Benz factory to AMG.
Well, that definitely started around like 1990, and it wasn't all. So it's like, just because it doesn't have the option code doesn't mean it's not a real card. So
You just have to kind of think of it as it was a small outfit, and they just kind of did whatever they were told. And, you know, the record keeping was not really at the top of their
their list.
Yeah, part of the priorities, I guess.
So that's the nice thing. You know, you can build anything, right? If you find the parts for it. So.
But that does make the barrier to entry a little more enticing because they're all different. So yours isn't like another, and what you do to make yours, your AMG is different from what other people would do. It's easier to own than in that regard. But as far as getting a little more technical, like I said, this is a 117 engine, which they put in just about everything. This is a, what was this one out of? This is the 5-liter, right?
That's out of the SEC, the silver one.
Yes. So this is a 117 motor. This is a 5-liter European high compression. So this is a 560, which came later. So the 117s were 450, 5-liter, and 5.6, which their smaller brother, sister, whatever you want to call it, was the 116, which was essentially more or less just a smaller displacement. So Achilles heel on the 116, 117 engines is these guys here usually. It's kind of the big one is the timing chain. It is the worst on the single row chain engines, which was on 380s in the US only, which was a very bad decision on their part. But even the double rollers still age, and you'll have issues with the guides breaking and the chain stretching, which is a thing. But especially if you let them sit or change the oil, the big thing on these is to prime the oiling system before you fire it. This one, the car sat for like 20 odd years, and the person that acquired it from its dormant state just decided to hit it with some ether and crank the key. And it ended up grenading a couple valves and jumping time. So we've got some knocked off rocker arms and stuff back here, and I can kind of wheel it towards y'all for some interactive if you want to get your hands dirty, by all means.
You can
So
see the stem's gone, the spring's gone.
mhm.
It just broke the top off of it.
So
So it was sleeping for 20 years and it went to $9 grand.
yeah.
Why did it go to $9 grand?
Well,
Ether.
Exaggerating, but yes. When we fire it with ether, it's
finally
so
lit.
such a strong combustive that it sings the RPM up, and then you've got no oil against your timing chain tensioner, which is hydraulic. The next step would have been yanking the intake manifold or the crab head spaghetti that lives up in this direction, and pulling the cylinder head and checking the condition of the piston cylinder wall, and of course it would need a head job of some sort.
Had to make an impressive noise.
It had to have been
I'm
ugly.
sure it would have. I'm sure they knew very quickly they did something very wrong. So
So what would be the right way to do that? How would you
So-
quote, unquote, prime
Cool.
right thing would be is to pull the crank sensor, or pull the coil wire so there's no spark, or pull fuel. Just prevent one of your three things: air, fuel, spark, and
Oh, just crank it over.
and just
so turn
spin
it
it
over
over,
until
just
your
with the
gauge
starter.
finally makes pressure.
Yeah, and they have the oil pressure gauge that's not a dummy light like many modern things. So you can actually see it build oil pressure. And you can also mechanically check the oil pressure if you wanted to do that. You could pull the oil pressure switch and do it that way. But you just want to make sure.
Once you did that and primed it up and saw some pressure, then you'd put whatever back together, and then you could safely.
Yeah, then you're safe to
Mhm.
start. Yes.
That would have been probably all it would have taken to save the engine.
But it's still
never
started. You can't
You
control
probably could get away with it, but just not.
Yeah. It doesn't take much. Yes.
What do you think from like a fuel perspective, like with this fuel injection system? Tell us why you hate it.
I like it.
It
I
never ends.
appreciate it. The thing about it is, even when it's terribly broken, it runs and it works.
Terrible.
Yeah, I mean there's a big swing of how well it could run. These notoriously the intakes always leak, which is not a fun thing to do.
The whole bottom of it's a big plastic rubber boot down here, and it goes under, and it just splits and cracks, and you
Yeah.
suck air and all that.
And it's also two pieces, so there's the lower half and the upper half, and they have these little donuts between the two halves, and those turn rock hard. And then you get all the air vacuum leaks, and then you have to, and what most people do is from right up here, they just adjust the mixture. They just richen it to make compensate for the extra air leak. And then they're like, oh, it's fine, and they pass it on to the next guy, and then he tinkers with it a little more to make it run a little better, and then we get them, and it's a daisy chain of fixing it. It's like, well, let's fix the vacuum leaks, and then we have to fix everything else. And these old systems are very unforgiving to ethanol and varnish and fuel sitting in them, which a lot of them are at the age where they sit. And that's kind of where it becomes expensive or a headache is because people are like, it never ends, and it's because it's all full of varnish from sitting, and you just have to go through it all for it to be 100% right.
But it is fixable.
Yes.
It is.
It's just time and money.
So
Time and money, yes, absolutely.
Do you find there, so the cylinders don't get rusty? You don't tend to, they don't tend to get.
no, not really a thing on those. All depends on how they were stored. If you store them with the spark plugs out of them or something, you may run into some, moisture getting into the cylinders. But if they're generally sealed in their normal state with the air filter on it and so forth, you don't really have to worry about that. Cams are more of an issue in the rockers. They tend to wear, especially using the wrong oil. They like a lot of zinc in the oil, and we've got what we call anti-seize. We've got a special oil with it's a special anti-friction additive called molybdenum disulfate, if you want to get scientific about it. But it looks like graphite anti-seize, which Andy's going to grab some. But using the right oil for these, no synthetics, you want to use old dinosaur stuff. And that helps with the wear on cam lobes and rockers. But we'll wait for Andy to show up here and we can show you some oil.
Wouldn't have guessed that natural oil was better than synthetic.
Yeah, on the old stuff.
Is it the additive package or what?
Additive package, different clearances, and that sort of thing. And like synthetics, zinc is not very common in the modern oils. So the older conventional stuff is much higher in zinc content.
What do you consider old?
So anything pretty much pre-113. So anything designed before 99-ish would be what we'd consider the old style engines. So the 119, which succeeded this motor, which is the quad cam, 4.2 liter and 5 liter. 104, the straight six, 103, the straight six. If you want to pass that around, that is fresh oil.
That looks like liquid graphite.
That's kind of what it's like.
But isn't part of the problem that most of the time when a car sits is because something happened and somebody stopped using it? Very rarely do they intentionally
Just
mothball
park
it and prep it
Yes.
to not be used.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so-
generally there
something
was
happens.
a problem to start to give up on it for.
Either the car or life circumstances.
Mm-hmm.
$100 if you taste test it.
Pass it back.
I need the money for my W124.
Exactly.
So if you buy one of these, so you go out, you bring a trailer, buy one, it's got one of these engines in it, it runs. What's the first thing you want to do?
Smoke the intake.
What's that?
Smoke the intake. So we get a smoke machine, pump the intake full of smoke, and see where it's leaking
See if
from.
it pukes out the bottom or out the back, and
Because
then you know you've got many vacuum leaks.
You would do.
yes.
Not what I would
So the first thing is bring it here.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's the answer to everything here. is bring it here
Pre-purchase
first.
inspections.
But that's what you would do. Is you would say that the intake is sort of the entry level problem that would
Yes.
lead to all kinds of
Yeah.
interesting.
Inspect your cams, inspect your timing chain. Does it rattle when it starts up? Because that is kind of your precursor to knowing that is coming soon. Is you fire it off and you get just a little rattle for a couple seconds on startup. Are some of the telltales that there are issues. We do see some oil leaks around the head gaskets sometimes. They're usually just kind of seepy like these. You can see there's just like some staining, sweatiness. Not really something you have to address. Who are DIY people here? Get out.
This engine is extremely clean, for one. I just did my valve covers and I have quite a bit of
Varnish,
Yeah.
kind of
I
orangey.
run mobile one extensively, only it's never gotten hot.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
It-
Maybe
it's-
any way to flush that out, or you
You-
have any?
Liquid moly makes a
Engine flush.
engine flush.
Mm-hmm.
2 cans of that, 15 minutes, let it get out of blazes, and it'll run through like water.
You just want to be cautious with that because if you break something loose that clogs the pickup tube, then you're
Like if
in
you
a
have
whole
a
nother
really
world of problem.
nasty engine.
If you've
That's
got
what
a
I'm
nasty
afraid of.
problem,
But if you just have the Browning varnish, then transmission fluid works great too. This one's super low mileage. I want to say 70,000 kilometers, if I remember right.
It was French, right?
The car was from France, yeah.
So you guys gonna try to resurrect it?
Maybe.
We keep hanging on to it. We don't want to throw it away, but
It's
we
one
don't
of
have
those
time to
yeah,
fix it either.
one of those things that's very far on the back burner.
can you get these? So let's say you bought a car and it was a cratered engine. Can you
get a donor car? Are these available still that you can pick up that aren't?
So US spec stuff is dime a dozen. You can find them all day long. But this being European specific, it is very difficult because it is a European 5-liter, which we didn't get here.
So is that only from an AMG version because it went through AMG?
So this isn't specific to AMG being a 5-liter. They did tweak some of them and put them as 5.4s. You know, they'd bore them out and do things. Again, back to the AMG thing, you never know what you were going to get. Sometimes they'd take the 5-liter, punch it out to 5.4. They'd take the 5.6, punch it out to 6 liters. You either got the single cams or you got the elusive thing that everyone thinks they want, in my opinion, is the quad cam engines, which to us as mechanics is a headache. Yes, they're porous. So the quad cam heads, the castings are porous, so they leak through themselves.
Through the metal.
You know? Yeah, it's not a gasket you can fix or anything like that. It is legitimately the casting. Yes, it is beautiful. And they're 3-piece, so you know there's a lot going on there, and there's not many of them, and they're just yeah.
And with
we'll
the
get to
higher compression, obviously to build it, can you stroke it like a US engine? Can you stroke it to get yourself some more compression, or is that just why bother?
Like I said, you can just change pistons to bump your compression, but usually with stroking these, like I said, the 5-liters will get punched out to 5.4s, and the 5.6s will get punched out to 6 liters. Is the most common, which again Blakely can probably correct me if I'm missing anything there.
But we didn't get in the US the 5.
Those are gray market.
Okay.
So we got the awesome 380, you know, anemic boat anchor. So, and then in 86, am I correct? Lately, the 560 was released specifically for the U.S. So in Europe, they still got the 5-liter. And I think there was some, like this one's from Japan, still has a 560. Again, some of my cohorts here are more historians than I am. That covers most of the 117 stuff. Your oiler tubes here can be an issue. They can break and you lose. These are just like oil squirters, essentially.
There's little holes at each cam lobe that just drip out on there.
So, you know, when you stick your sprinkler out in the lawn, kind of the same concept. You know, the hose pressures at one end and it squirts oil out onto the cams.
So if the plastic breaks here, you have no oiling to the rest of your cam.
Usually they'll make a tapping noise. You'll hear it. This is also common on the 119 engines, which I don't have one in here, but the white SL that has the little flag stand out front is that engine. And they have a similar setup of oiler tubes. They go across like the cam lobe or the cam cap, and they're same thing, plastic. And they will, usually on those, it breaks the end cap off of it. So all the oil pressure just dumps out of there, and you get the same thing. You get tick, 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 tick. So it tells you, you know, they talk to you most of the time.
If you listen.
We had a gentleman here, he's got a 129 with the quad cam 119, and his was tapping, and I'm like, hey, you need to do your oiler tubes. He's like, it's been like that for 5 years. And the car's got 205,000 when we fixed it. He finally said, okay, we'll fix it. And we got in there and they pumped up, and it's been quiet ever since.
It's happy.
There's no
Didn't hurt anything.
Abnormal wear or anything, whereas that's not the case with these. 119s do not really have cam issues, whereas these are the ones that do. It's also good to do valve adjustments on the old motors. That is a thing to adjust your valve clearances. So if you have some a different type of ticking noise, that could be your valve clearances are a little loose, and it can also cause some low compression and misfiring if they're too tight. On that same subject, they are known to have like valve guide, valve seat issues, where you will get low compression from that also. And that's not a horrible fix, it's not detrimental. But any other questions about the 116, 117s?
This doesn't have hydraulic lifters?
It does.
It does.
That's the hydraulic lifter right there.
Right.
And I can't squish it, but that's the squish. And on the opposite side, it compresses the valve. So it sweeps across right here and compresses it, and this will take up the compensation. Yeah. Kind of like a little shock on one side.
116s are the ones you more so do a valve adjustment on. Which again, the 116 is just the smaller, older brother of the 117, the small displacement engines, which would be your 3.5 and similar, which would be in something like the 109 in the corner. 119s are all hydraulic, don't have to mess with them. So that is more or less the bottom end of this engine with quad cams or quad cam heads added on top. And some people do Frankenstein these. They will put, they'll use the 117 block and put 119 heads on them. I know the green wide body SEC, if you're familiar with that one, has a hybrid 117, 119 motor. In my opinion, if you want a quad cam, go for the 119 stuff or a hybrid 117, 119. If you want to spend a lot of money, you can go for the AMG quad cam. But then again, you know, you have something that probably won't depreciate. Yours is more like this spec, right? The white one?
Yeah,
It's a Euro 560. Yeah. Or Japanese, whatever. Is yours Japanese? Yeah. So Blakely has his wide body white SEC, which is very similar to this one here, with some a little more weight in the fenders, a little more hips. But if you want to check that one out, but unless you want to go further, we can keep going. There is a lot on these engines. Unless you want to move on to something a little newer. Any other questions, Mike?
Molybdenum disulfate. They sell that separately too, is that accurate,
Yes.
right?
So you can also buy molybdenum disulfate separately, which we use this in some of the modern engines that have cylinder scoring. If y'all are familiar with those, we'll get to in a little bit. But this is essentially just this that you can put in your modern synthetics or anything like that.
So when do you, at what point do you flip from that in a modern engine to Ceratec?
I don't really use the Ceratec. I don't actually have it. Ceratec. I've looked into what the differences are, but I like this stuff, so that's kind of what I've...
Is this worth it if you don't have the little troublesome cylinder like mine, 156?
Don't worry about it.
Don't worry about it.
Unless you want the added peace of mind of, you know, but 156 doesn't need it. We put it in all the 278, 157 engines that have the spray-in liners that are known to have cylinder scoring. Which we were going to dig one of those out, but it is in the woods with a yellow jacket nest, so I'm not going to do that.
We can go back and look at it.
Yeah, we can all go back there and we can
I'll bring
do
the brake
that,
clean.
Exactly.
It's more fun.
It is.
Yeah, that was kind of my, with the new spray-in cylinder liners and so forth, the newer ones, the 6 cylinders, the 3-liter, 256.
That's the straight 6. So the 276 would be the same. Yeah. We haven't seen it in that one. Yeah, I know for the modern stuff they like the Ceratec. This I think they came out with later, if I remember right. I've actually got the Liquimoly catalog to use a cheat sheet that we can talk about in a little bit of the differences between them. I think that one is more like a friction modifier. It doesn't have like the substance to be
Coating.
Yeah.
Yeah, it looks like oil and water together.
Yes.
It's milky, yeah.
So was that worthwhile adding to the straight 6 with the whatever that's 256?
The 256 is still a little too new that we don't, and they're still a lot under warranty, so we don't get to see them.
Yeah.
But
Turbo wastegate rattle is all I've seen so far, which is kind of normal with a turbo. People just don't like to hear it.
When we were still at the dealer, we'd have people complain about it, and early on, people were replacing turbos that were brand new and that sort of thing, and kind of like with the superchargers on the 113K, also Benz put a stop to that rather quickly. When those were fairly new, there were a lot of issues with the spacing on the clutch of the supercharger, and they chirp when you take off if the spacing's too wide. So they go clink, and they would just replace the whole supercharger under warranty. So one of our buddies that started with Benz in the late 80s, he said he went down to the VPC, which is like their control center, and he said they had a whole wall like stacked to the ceiling of 113 superchargers. But Benz came out and said, yeah, you're going to quit doing this because that's not what's wrong with them. You can fix it.
You can shim it and adjust the play in between the clutch.
And the turbo wastegates are the same thing. And what we started doing when we were at the dealer is we'd go right to one on the lot that has 3 miles on it and say, listen to it. It does the exact same thing. It's unfortunate, but it's every manufacturer has wastegate rattle at this point. I think that kind of covers most of the stuff on this era. If you want to move on to the, I said there wasn't a whole lot of 119 AMG stuff. Do you still have yours? Yeah. So there's a few 6 liters floating around. There was some 55s too, right? Or is that just one? Wasn't there? Or is it just 113? Yeah. So 6 liters for the most part. Not a lot of them, like less than 50, isn't it?
Yeah.
As far as in SLs, but yeah. Same thing. You see what he says. He's like, yeah, there's about. But anyway, we will jump across this one to kind of stay in more chronological order. I'll let Andy kind of take over. This is his heart. So he would like to, he started at the dealer in 2005 when these had just come out a couple years prior. And yeah, I'll let him talk about them for a minute so I can catch my breath and grab a drink.
So this is the 113. It came in naturally aspirated and supercharged. This is the clutch we were talking about earlier. You can adjust that play so it doesn't chirp. Usually if it's out of adjustment, you'll accelerate and it goes chirp, and you'll hear it. It's pretty annoying. I love this engine. It's good for 300,000 miles usually. I believe the failure of that engine was due to its tune. A lot of times people will put a smaller diameter pulley, they'll up the injectors, try to up the boost, and they never live. They always detonate in some way. If you're ever looking to try to get one of these engines for a project, you always pull the oil filter, and a lot of them, it's because someone's been tinkering with it, and you'll find that it has glitter in the oil filter. Usually like crank bearings or something like that, the pistons have just had the crap beat out of them from being too much compression from the supercharger, from the smaller pulley. It's being spun faster than it should. But yeah, if you leave them alone, they're great cars. Common problems is valve covers. They leak all the time, mostly from the crankcase, crank ventilation covers here. It's just this silicone, Mercedes-Benz silicone, and it's a magnesium cover. And the magnesium will start to corrode, and it's like it's kind of powdery, like gray powdery stuff.
It's like aluminum, that white powder.
Yeah, it's even worse though. It's more powdery, and the glue can't adhere to it anymore, so it just releases. It no longer bonds to it. So valve covers leak a lot, and the rear main's the same thing. It's a magnesium rear main cover plate. Same thing, it just starts to corrode and it releases the glue and it starts to leak.
Yeah, these are all aluminum engines, other than like the valve covers and the intake manifolds, which are magnesium, which we do not enjoy by any means, because the magnesium disintegrates. It turns into powdery dust, especially like here in the breather hose connections. These will just like flake off and fall apart. It just turns into powder.
Yeah, sometimes you're doing valve cover jobs and you'll pull the hose off and the nipple comes with it. And you need a whole valve cover. You can't get just the cover itself. You have to get it's the whole cover together. You don't get just the PCV chamber. You have to get the whole thing.
That whole thing is magnesium.
Correct. So the valve covers and the rear main cover are magnesium. The rest of the engine's all aluminum.
Intake manifolds on an NA motor. These are spray-in. So, yeah, they've done spray-in like since the 90s, but the only one that's really presented to be an issue are the 278 motors.
The non-supercharged intake is also magnesium, and you'll see blistering on the runners. They'll actually get a hole right straight through them.
And it'll have a vacuum leak, high idle, and mixture fault codes because of that. And
Why do they use magnesium?
They save 1/100th of an ounce. I think someone's hand got greased. Yeah, you got full aluminum or full magnesium, and the difference is nothing between the two. This is more expensive to make, harder to maintain. This I think money. Someone got paid.
Nobody makes an aftermarket update or anything.
Not that I'm aware of.
Not that we're aware of.
You can get them painted and stuff like that, and sometimes they will still blister through later on. It's not a 100% fix. I painted mine on my personal car, and it's held for probably 6 years now. I don't have any blistering, and I painted the intake as well, hoping to preserve it. So far, it's worked.
Good thing is these are plentiful too. They're everywhere, and you can get them very cheap, and most parts are still available.
Can you take a normally aspirated engine and put a supercharger on it?
People do it.
These are forged.
Yeah, there is So the bottom ends are different as far as connecting rods, crankshaft, and so forth.
These are heavier bottom end than a naturally aspirated.
Now, is it a different main cap, like a 4 or a 6 bolt versus a 2 bolt, or is it just the crank itself is forged versus not?
Right.
Connecting
Correct.
rods are okay.
Just the insert parts, but the construction is still the same.
So if you have a blown block, you could get a block from any 113 and use it on 113K with your, if you build it.
Yeah.
You'd have to find the same displacement, but yeah, it should be the same. Because
I think there's. I'm trying to remember some of this stuff. It's a lot of information to retain. I know a common misconception is the 155, which is the real hot SLR motor, is different.
Well, McLaren made it.
They were involved, yeah.
got
But
same
that's a
valve
dry
covers.
sump, so those do not have a wet sump or where all the oil lives in the bottom of the engine. They have a separate oil tank, but so that whole crankcase is totally different. That's even in Mercedes' literature. We had an SLR training book from back in the day, and they're like, they are not the same. There are very similarities, but they do share parts, but it is they are technically different. But again, all the AMG ones are 5.4s, so the displacement is different from the 4.3 and the 5 liter that is the normal ones. So yeah, this one
But is the displacement from piston diameter or stroke?
stroke usually
so
is the most common.
If you have the block, you can stroke it with.
Mhm.
Okay.
I think there are some board differences. I don't remember all the technical numbers, but
Yeah, we'll get into it later.
yeah, like I say, we can get as technical as you want, but sometimes I'm going to need a cheat sheet. There's only so much this can retain. But if y'all want to come in and check this out, this one had some rod bearing damage.
It's fun. Yeah.
Mhm.
Oh yeah. Ooh, that's.
you see how much it shifted out of it. I think it just beat the crap out of it and just kept hammering, and was mushing out the side.
Yeah, started getting into the copper layer here. So usually rod bearings are either bimetal or trimetal. So it's what is it, nickel, copper, and
Babbitt and copper, which I think Babbitt's nickel. Some kind of nickel.
essentially, yeah. The sacrificial layer is like the nickel Babbitt, and then you start getting into the copper layer. Not super common on these engines, but again, that's kind of I guess what you could call the Achilles heel of these engines is they are the barrier to entry and making them go extra fast is very inexpensive. A small pulley and a questionably hot tune is kind of all it takes to take one of these out.
They scream. They make a ton of power with that, but not for long.
If it's not done, even then it's just, you can get an easy 600 horsepower out of them, but you got to be careful. Cylinder 7, so the back cylinders on this side, which would be on the driver's side of the engine, tend to run lean when you put like long tube headers on them. So a lot of people would burn up a piston doing that.
So if you're looking at one, obviously that pulley, you can tell if they put a small pulley on it.
Right.
Can you check for a tune?
It's tough. Some say that they can find it, but you have to be pretty in tune with looking at software calibration numbers and stuff. I tuned one of my cars when it was new at the dealer, because that's kind of a no-no as far as warranty goes. And I had that same gentleman that started in the 80s. I said, hey, will you look for it? And it took him a few minutes, and he was like, yeah, I can see something's a little off in the calibration number, but if you didn't tell me, I wouldn't have a clue.
So you have to actually go look at the maps to see.
You'd have to actually,
It's not a serial number or something.
A lot of companies put stickers on the computer, so then you might, but even then you don't know 100%.
But you could reflash it and take the tune out.
Yeah.
So it's got the sticker, but no tune.
Yeah. But these, the core engines can go 300,000, 400,000, 500,000 miles without too much fuss.
So the bolts between the magnesium cover and the aluminum head, you know what those bolts are made of?
Aluminum.
Those are aluminum.
Usually, yeah. Or they're
these are the steel bolts.
Yeah, the
here.
steel bolts.
Head bolts from head to blocks, aluminum. They're steel bolts.
The head bolts are steel, but these guys
Correct.
here, these are steel.
These are steel.
Yeah.
Regular steel, and they have a galvanized coating on them.
Yeah, that's what it is.
Keep them from
the whole
rusting.
thing is coated.
Mhm.
Kelly?
Yeah.
Are the top caps for the cam part of the
No.
valve cover? Okay, so they're separate.
No, that started with the 272, 273 engines, of which there are no AMG variants, so we can't really talk about those to be on topic. But yeah, that's when they started doing the integrated cam bearings, where the valve cover is the cam bearings.
So the V8s don't have that. The
They do.
integrated cam bearings in the.
They do.
All, yeah,
Not
273
these,
V8.
yeah. So 112, 113 does not, but anything
was the
after that
last.
does.
Like the 157, 156?
156 does not. But,
156. It's not.
which we're heading that direction. But yeah, 272, 273, 278, 157, all those have integrated cam caps.
They're just trying to get the engines shorter and smaller.
Mm-hmm. It's usually for pedestrian safety, believe it or not. So that's why the throttle bodies got moved to the back of the engines on all Mercedes. It's because having the throttle body in the front raises the height, and they're all about in Europe having the height of the,
It's a
of
crumple
the
zone.
damage, the
It's
hit point of a pedestrian.
It's a
They
crumple
want
zone
as
for
low
a
as they
body.
can, so that's part of the reason. Because you see this valve cover sits so high, but when you integrate it with the cam caps, you can shrink it by a couple inches. So that's another reason the engines can sit lower. And just remember, most flaws seem to come from regulations, because they had to make something work because of something they had to do.
The throttle body on the back is more interesting.
It is.
As you lay it across the fender to fix it.
Well, yeah.
Speaking on the rest of the cars, we love these. I like the 63s personally. The 55s are great. They're by no means bad. You get the upgraded leather and the seating and so forth. You get the suede headliner in certain years of them. You get the bigger brakes. So there's a lot of niceties that come with getting the AMG in these.
It's just hard to find a nice one. They've gotten down to the price point where people that don't really take care of the car can buy them.
We love them. Just try to find one that's been well cared for and,
Stock
the
as
least,
possible.
stock as possible, least modified. Which this one just had mostly stick-on stuff, when it was first acquired, which I think we took most of it off, right? But I see he painted his calipers, so there's some stuff. Oh, it was this one. Yeah, see? So your supercharger pulley is here, and normally to get that off, the best way to do it is either to loosen the engine mounts and crank up the engine, or you have to hold the hub of the supercharger. You can see how the clutch works here, is that I can spin the supercharger independently of the belt drive. But on this one, they channeled out part of the radiator fan to have more access to swap out the pulley.
So I think I read somewhere, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the W211, they also did diesels with these.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Which would you recommend, like an AMG regular gas like this, or would you recommend the diesel for reliability purposes?
I hate the diesels.
48.
You hate them?
So there were good ones for 2 model years, 05, 06. So that was the last of the straight 6 diesels, called the 648. And those go forever and don't. The only real annoying issue on those is what we call Black Death. So the injectors have little copper washers on the bottom of them, and they don't tend to stay sealing, and it lets blow-by of soot and compression and so forth to go up the injector bore, which is about this long, and it'll live in the valley of the injectors and
melt that foam.
Oh yeah, there's a piece of foam insulation on top of the injectors because diesels can't be noisy, and it'll turn that into tar.
You have to like
and
chisel
you have
the
to like
injector.
heat it and chisel it, and once you get there, even then they've got these stretch bolts that are 6 millimeter
Torx.
Yes, but the bolt size is 6 millimeters, so they're super small and they're stretch bolts. So they'll get stuck, and you go to take them out and they break, and then you've almost trashed a cylinder head, and all that cleaning and stuff. Sometimes you have to put it's aluminum threads, so I've had to put inserts where the threads will get torn up in those cylinder heads. And also, if you're not careful, you have to recut the seats of the injector because the high pressure diesel going past the seal will actually like put marring and marks so it won't seal properly. And it's just a headache.
648, it's good engine. 642s.
Yes.
That's the
I
V6
deal with, like,
diesel
the
after.
W126 era. That's where my expertise comes from. And so, like, back then, I know that those diesels were usually built to last longer than the regular gas. So I don't know if there's like a certain cutoff when that's swapped or.
07 model year. Any diesel after 07, just run as far and fast as you can. It's just not worth it. Which I wish I had one of my techs here today, because he's had one for years, and he finally was like, he's like, once a month I have to fix something on that stupid car. And even then, there's some difficult ones. There's the 603 rod benders.
My dad and I were talking, and we kind of determined that between somewhere 2007 and 11 is kind of when that was their doom years.
So 2012, it got worse because they added the urea injection to everything, which is a whole nother disaster. So if you have to have a 07 and up one, 07 to 11 would be the one. And then 12 and up, things get really bad. We've got one out in the parking lot now. It'll limit the amount of times you can start the engine. So then you just get stuck.
Because of the exhaust fluid.
Yeah, all because of the exhaust fluid, the after treatment of the exhaust.
Limits it because you're out of fluid, or why?
Yeah, it'll start
Or
counting
there's
down.
a fault with the system.
You have 6 starts left, 5 starts left. You got 0.
Oh, hell.
Does it know what's in it? I mean, can you pour anything in there, or is it?
You could, but it'll get grumpy real fast.
It's a terrible sensor. It's not a float. It's like an ultrasonic sensor. When you refill it, you have to go back and calibrate it and tell it, hey, I filled up. It's an awful system.
As far as diesels and AMG, they've only made one, and it was only in Europe. It was the C30 CDI AMG. So it was a 203 chassis C-Class, but it was the only diesel that AMG has ever done. And if any of y'all didn't know, AMG is not specific to Mercedes. They did a Mitsubishi Galant back in the day. And what else did they do, Blakely? They did a
Civic.
Yeah, they did do a Civic AMG. Yeah. So if you want a cheap entry to an AMG, you can get a Mitsubishi Galant or a Honda Civic. We'll move on to our S63 over there. So this is one of my favorite eras. This is the 156. We'll do a salesman plug. This is for sale. It's on Bring a Trailer this week. It went live yesterday. So check it around and put some bids on it. And it is no reserve. This is a 2010 S63 AMG. So the 156 came out for 2007 model year in most models. There were some differences between when they launched it and specific chassis. This is the only year of the W221 S-Class that's facelifted, so you get the updated lights, bumpers, some of the interior bits and so forth with this engine, because after 2010 and 2011 they went to the bi-turbo 157 engine. So this is the engine that was built and designed by AMG solely. So this was not based on any other engine in this room or any other Mercedes. They did all the building on it. And actually the lead engineer, or one of the engineers for it, one of the main engineers also did the Porsche Carrera GT V10. So there are some similarities in the cylinder head design and so forth, and the timing system between those two engines, which is pretty cool. It is not a 6.3, it is actually a 6.2 liter, which Benz has done for years. Like with my 6.9 out front, it is actually a 6.8 liter. But they wanted to pay homage to the 109 chassis, which they had the 6.3 in, and also the 600 grosser. These, when they came out, got a lot of bad rap because compared to their nearly bulletproof predecessor, they had some faults, mainly with the timing system and the cylinder heads. The bottom ends of them are completely strong. We don't see any issues with those. The main one that everyone talks about is headbolts. So the original headbolts in the 156 were a Torx style bolt, and they updated them to an E-Torx later in life. But what would happen, and I've actually got on my table here a little example I'll pass around for y'all. So this is a headbolt out of a 156 engine, and what would happen is usually the head would snap off right here at the top of the bolt. Sometimes we'd see them crack here. I know Paul had one that failed further down the bolt, but most of the time you just see the head pop off, and it's usually just because you can see it kind of corrodes there. And what that will cause is, this is what's holding the cylinder head to the cylinder block, and it essentially blows your head gasket, and you'll get coolant ingress into the cylinders, either to the point you'll just get a coolant message, and you're like, where'd my coolant go? And you top it off and you keep driving, it comes back, and you're like, where's it going? And it's because it's getting burned out the tailpipe. Some of them will be bad enough that you'll have the sweet maple smell and the white smoke coming out the exhaust. They failed to varying degrees, and they also failed to the point it would lock up a cylinder, and you could bend a rod.
What years was that?
So, like I said, 2007 model year is when most of them came out, and they ran them up until the 2014 model year in the C-Class only. Most of them went to about 2011 or 2012. But the headbolt update from the factory did not come until a certain engine number, which I don't have on the top of my head at the moment.
In the SLS, that's when they did the change for the master headbolt.
Right, but on the 156 specifically, there's an engine number that they switched them to, which most people say if it has the black plastic valve covers instead of the aluminum ones like here, that they have the updated head bolts, which is not true. So you have to look. Mostly if it's a 2012 to 2014, it will have these bolts updated already. But again, you need to check the engine number to be 100%, which the engine number is back here on the back of the motor. And you can actually see this if y'all want to. Here, I'll just roll it around for y'all. So this will be your engine number, 156. So 156, of course, being the base engine. 983 is the variant, and then the rest of the numbers are actually like the production number of the engine, which this one is what, 80 or 60. These things, the dot matrix is terribly difficult to read, but that's how you could check. You could, when this is mounted in the car, you can still see it with like a mirror or flashlight. You can look.
So you don't recommend blanket replacing the M156 head bolts?
We do, as long as you bring it here. Like I said, we've seen them with 200,000 miles on their original head bolts, but it's that peace of mind thing. Like, do you want to be on a mountain run and one pops? You don't want to have to worry about it. It's really not bad. I mean, the bolts, I think they sell them in 2 kits, one for each cylinder head. I think $186 retail for each set of bolts. You have to buy 2 of those.
But you need to remove the cams to do it.
Yes, which again on this engine isn't hard at all. No integrated caps, so the valve covers pop right off, and then you've got a couple timing tools. You pull the camshaft adjusters off, pull the cam caps, pull the cams out, and then you just do them one by one.
It is hard for us.
Yeah.
You have to buy a timing special tool, and it's a little involved.
And it's just make sure you've done your shoulder workout that day, because it is a 5-stage torque. So it's 10 Newton meters, 50 Newton meters, and 3 stages of 90 degrees. And you have to do that 20 times. So by the end of it, you're like, oh,
Round numbers, how many of these have you done?
What's that?
How many of these have you done?
Oh, gosh. No, we've done
15, 20?
Yeah, between under 20. I've got a whole box full of the bolts somewhere. No, like I said, it's more for peace of mind, and I personally haven't seen a broken one. I've heard of them, and I know Paul, which works here, he had one, but Andy worked at the dealer the whole time these were in production, and I don't think you ever saw one.
I've seen one. An example of what the Torx looks like. This is not the right bolt, but it goes from an inverted Torx to a regular Torx. So this is what you're looking for, that style.
People don't tend to tinker with these too much as far as performance modifications. The big one is the Weiss Tech or similar supercharger. But other than that, people just do like air boxes, a tune, and long tube headers. On the topic of the cylinder heads, like I said, most of the faults on this engine are, dedicated to the cylinder heads. So they've got tappets, which I know I've got some somewhere also. So the tappets will seize in their bores. They're supposed to spin. So when the cam hits them, it spins the tappet. But they will stop spinning in their bore, and then the cam just hammers on it. And you'll wear out the camshaft, and I've seen it wear through a lifter bucket. So it'll actually wear completely through it to where it's just hitting the valve stem. That means someone heard it for a very long time going tap, 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 tap. But like we said over there, it talks to you, it gives you the warning. It's just up to the owner to say, to either put their blinders on or to say, okay, something's wrong. So that's the upper half. And then the lower half, and then the mid plate is where the troublesome usually is. So these are your throttle bodies. So they are not on the back of the engine. They are actually housed inside of the intake manifold, which is a little bit different of a design. You get twin throttle bodies. You get one here and one here. And so that's the 3-piece, like we said. Technically, you could call it 4 pieces. But this magnesium mid plate is the usual offender. And it's usually where the corrugated wiring insulation there is
so it'd be right here is where that wire lays, and I guess it holds condensation or something.
It cracks the magnesium?
Wears
just
through it
blister
and
up, and there'll be a
blisters.
hole there, and it's equivalent to an intake leak because you're leaking between the throttle plates.
So that's the aftermarket plate they sell is
The and it's aluminum instead of magnesium, yes. Which again, Mercedes does not support. All they will sell you is this complete intake manifold, which is $2,400. The counter warranty does not exist at Mercedes, which sometimes it's nice for us. It's like we bought a bad part, we put it on. What we did is right, and we don't have to eat the labor to fix it. You know, we just take it to them, and so it's beneficial in that regard. But waiting 2 weeks for the dealer and that sort of thing, and then if you don't have your ducks in a row, you end up paying their $250, $280 labor rate for them to diagnose it.
So that's an original Mercedes part that's faulty from the manufacturer.
It was 10 minutes old. It wasn't. The car never left.
Why did you do a whole manifold instead of the?
So aftermarket, only this plate's available. So if you have an issue with the upper piece or the lower piece, you're stuck.
Okay, so those corrode too with the
they do.
plain magnesium corrosion.
Just this is the main offender, is the middle plate, and you can kind of hodgepodge it together, maybe with some JB Weld or something, but not the way you. Here you go. This is where we can see. I can pass this around again. Sorry to get y'all dirty.
That's
but,
the blistering.
This is the
in the front right here.
You see the
That's
hole?
what had to be replaced.
This is what was. See, this time it wasn't the mid plate. We ordered a mid plate because we knew it was leaking, and we got in here and we're like, no, it's the front piece there.
That's pure corrosion.
Yes, that's magnesium corrosion.
What's even more concerning?
And kind of flowers like that, and there's a big hole in it.
So did they finally stop? I know that they stopped the valve covers. Did they finally stop all this stuff in magnesium and get smart?
They got plastic now.
Yeah, that's true.
So I would prefer magnesium.
So why is the magnesium doing that?
It's a coating, and that's just what magnesium does. Just like rust, if you scratch the paint off, it starts to rust or steel.
This is how it corrodes. But what's even more concerning is you can see the flakes and the powder that comes from it, and that's already past your air filter. That's what your engine is consuming, which we haven't really seen any failures come of that, but it is a possibility. Yeah, here's a tappet.
This is a brand new one. It's not failed, nothing wrong with it.
But what it'll do, so when the cam lobe hits this, so this is a 156 cam, which is this one of the cores? I think so. When this rides around, the cam lobe hits that tappet there, it's supposed to spin along with the lobe. And like I said, these will seize in their bore and they'll quit spinning. And then every time you hit this, it's just hammering on it. And it'll wear a hole completely through the top
So
of
it'll
here.
just totally concave the lifter in.
Now that additive we were talking about earlier, does that help that? They have a hydraulic lifter one too.
Yeah, well, that's for the compression of the lifter, and what fails on this is it becomes grippy and it won't allow it to spin. So every time that lobe comes over it, it moves just a little.
Because what it's doing is whenever the cam hits it, it's rotating like this.
So every time
does that
it
keep
hits.
it from getting grippy, or does that gum up the works?
This should add more
It's
or
anti-friction,
less
which is what
friction
you want.
and cause it to spin
Excuse me
easier.
1 second.
You can also
Oh, you're
see
good.
how aggressive that cam is. This is a 276 cam, and you can see how tall and quick it slams that thing down. So it really wears the tips of the lobes really bad too. So usually whenever the buckets fail, it'll also wear out the tip of this cam.
So the lifters are steel and they're running in a magnesium bore?
Aluminum. It's aluminum head, so it's sitting in an aluminum bore.
These are what they consider the upgrade for the tappets. These are the Black Series tappets, which they are black to go with the name. So these have what's called a DLC or diamond-like coating. Do you have any familiarity with that? Yeah. You know more than I do as far as that stuff. I know what it's called.
It's like a diamond.
Yeah.
It's well named.
But these were for the, and not the 159, which is the SLS motor of this variant. They still got the normal tappets. This was specific to Black Series. And they got this extra coating, and they're actually lighter, they say. I don't think I've ever compared it. But they say I think they're right. They're about 30% lighter is what that has a bag, but.
Oh, wow.
So lighten up the valve train for more revolutions, being able to spin the motor up a little faster with the lighter valve train.
So that was, so it's not a 159 upgrade, it's only a 159 in black.
Yes, correct. Anyone else want to check these out? So unfortunately, the Black Series ones are not available anymore. These are one of the last sets. that we were able to get a hold of. So we keep them for someone that wants the upgrade. But it is a big expense because there are 32 of these little suckers, and these are $32.50 list each, but these are $49.50. So, you know, imagine $17 more times 32. It's a big expense difference. But again, it's one of those things. It's like while you're there, you know, do you want that upgrade, peace of mind, whatever you want to call it?
Is the coating on the cam surface or the sides?
It's on the sides of it.
Whole thing's coated.
And the top as well.
So I'm just wondering, does that just transfer the weight of the cam instead of the lifter?
Probably. I said there's not a big sample size of the Black Series engines for us to say, but that is the upgrade. And kind of more or less last thing on the 156 are the injectors. And they're not super expensive. They are port injected. They're not direct injected, which makes them a lot easier to deal with. But the injectors like to stick open. I'm just pointing because they live here in the intake manifold. They live in these ports here. And
it's just a fuel rail that's bolted here, and then each injector. It's fairly simple, like most cars.
So what are your symptoms of sticking open?
So usually you'll get smoke out the tailpipe.
If you're lucky.
If you're lucky, yeah. We had...
There's not much warning.
No, there's really not. You got to catch it because, it'll just go straight wide open. Depending on what RPM you're at, if you're at full throttle, you might survive for a little while, but...
Basically, a garden hose of fuel in your combustion chamber.
But at idle, what usually happens is it hydrolocks the cylinder.
Really?
Wow. Where's that? We gave that connecting rod to him, right?
Yeah, you wanted it back.
Yeah, we had we have a buddy that he has a low mileage one. It had like 20-some thousand miles on it. And usually we were recommending them, 80 to 100 to go ahead and do them for peace of mind. But his was the first one I saw fail so early, which again, age is a factor also. Which we harp to a lot of people. Age is worse than mileage, is what we say. See, Gary agrees. So use your cars, people. Put miles on them. But again, it'll hydrolock the cylinder, and something has to give because you can't compress all that fuel. And what usually gives is the connecting rod. And that's exactly what that one did. Is it bent the connecting rod, and yeah, it was not good. It was fixable though. We had to tear down the engine completely to the bed plate, and we put one piston connecting rod assembly in it and fixed it instead of him having to buy an engine because he had a P30 package, or P31, sorry.
Performance with the lower end.
Yeah, so his had the 507 horse variant of the engine in the C class. But it has forged rods, so they're a little different than the standard 156. So it was terrible to get. It took like a month to get stuff out of Germany because it was P31 specific.
We had to do a good bit of investigating because the car was knocking really bad. Mm-hmm. We took it apart and we didn't know exactly if it was salvageable. So we pulled it all apart, and the rod was like this. So that made the piston skirt closer to the counterweight of the crank. So the skirt was actually tapping the crank. That was the knocking noise. There was really nothing else wrong. The bearings and all were fine. So it was slapping the bottom of the skirt.
Do the replacement fuel injectors, are they like, is it a problem with the injector or just where it lives? Is the replacement going to go bad eventually too?
Probably.
It's the same thing.
It's the same Bosch part, yeah.
Right. That's put one in for me when you did everything else.
Right.
So they should be better. We haven't seen a second failure, so you would think, but there's nothing to say, after this part, number production date that we actually changed something. It's just like every 10 years. And like I said, they're port injectors. They're not super expensive. That's kind of what I like about these, because the successor to this, which we're about to dive into, is the 157 and 278 motors. These, they're pretty easy to work on. They're not super difficult. There's a couple special tools, but again, it's port injected. There's nothing super crazy that's difficult to do.
How about all those plastic lines that are running behind?
Yes, like this one, and there's a big corrugated oil breather in the back. The corrugated tube will crack and break, and it'll cause a lot of problems.
Yeah.
Not in the car.
This is a catch can, which the same guy that does the adjuster plates for us up in Canada did this for us as well. It has our logo on it in this nice copper color. But this is a catch can for one of these engines, or really whatever you want to put it on. So you just hook one side to the crankcase vent, and just basically plumb it in line. And it has like baffles and so forth in here that the oil will condense from a misty vapor, which is what it is in the combustion chamber, to down into actual, what would you call it? Just
drains it back into the
just
block.
drains it back. Lives in this area, and you just have to empty it every once in a while. Not that big a deal.
So you have two fittings on it. You cut the crankcase vent and just
So you put it in line.
Back here, where that diaphragm would live, you would take and put a threaded fitting here. And this is the engine vacuum, so you would put it to the high point. And then from down here is where the hose comes out that's from the top of the block. You would run that hose to the lower point. And then you can put this, in the engine bay, usually in the front's where we put it. And so you'd run two hoses from the back to here.
And then just every service, just check to see if you need to empty it.
Pretty much just gravity. The oil's heavier than the air and it just falls in there.
And if you don't like plastic, this is the oil filter housing cap. And he makes these billet ones.
Can you get it in a different color?
You can't. You don't like the copper?
I want the red.
He does make red, yeah. It's like a dark red, kind of like crimson almost. But it also has a test port for oil pressure. So it adds that, which is, we have one of those built for something else. Wasn't one of these?
159.
Yeah. Yeah, we did it for an SLS, 159 motor.
It's interesting. I tried to pull the sensor so that it would oil when it first starts, so that it wouldn't pause the oiling. Pulled the sensor, and I got a cat notification on
Like a check engine light?
check engine light.
So
the cats are dead.
That's weird.
Once we put it all back together, the cats cleaned out. I mean, that was the problem.
That was weird. That's
It
weird.
won't let you pull the.
That's strange.
Yeah.
So what he's talking about, the newer engines, which started with the 278, which is the non-AMG variant of the 157, is they put a oil control solenoid on the oil pump. And what it does is dump the oil pressure at cold start to create friction in the motor to warm up the engine faster for emissions. And you can see where that can go wrong very quickly. Because, at cold start you want oil. You don't want to starve the engine of oil, but that's what it does. So we unplug them on most cars. We've only had an issue with, what was it? I think it was a 212, a late 212, but usually it doesn't set a check engine light. It sets a fault code in the computer, so if you look, it'll be there. It'll say oil control solenoid fault. Again, usually we just unplug it because then it defaults to full oil pressure, and that is one saving grace that you can have for those engines because, as we talked about earlier, they are the ones that suffer from cylinder bore scoring, which Gary should be very familiar with his Porsche love, because they had issues with that back in the day. But again, they didn't on the older engines that still have the spray-in liners, which is what those have. It is the Nikasil spray-in liners. But what it seems to be is the piston seizure. So again, back to metallurgy. I don't know if it's an expansion rate of the piston relative to the engine block, but basically the skirt side of the piston seizes in the bore and it just tears up the cylinder walls and turns them into, I don't know, it looks like Mars, doesn't it?
It's pitted and
looks like the
scratched
moon,
and,
lumpy,
yeah.
and
it's
horrible. It'll get bad to the point that you'll actually get piston slap, where the piston's moving in the cylinder bore and they'll be going tick, 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 tick. So that's the damaging flaw of that one. That's kind of what I don't like about them, is they have a flaw that renders them a boat anchor. There are a couple people that make custom sleeves for them, but again, it gets so expensive to tear the motor down and put custom sleeves in it. Like, it'll easily hit $25,000 when we've looked at doing it for some people. On the normal variant, the 278, they actually switched to a steel or iron liner in March of 2015 build date. So there is an engine number that you can look for that, but they didn't do it for the AMGs. The AMGs got the spray-in liners all the way through.
We've yet to see an AMG.
Yeah, which we haven't seen one with like the horrible bore scoring. You'll see some of the normal like vertical marks and stuff, which is considered normal by Mercedes-Benz. But we haven't seen one turn into straight Swiss cheese, which could be because it's an AMG. People take more care of it. There's a lot of variables involved. Oil changes are huge. Don't do the 10,000 mile 1 year oil changes. You know, spend the extra couple $100 a year and do it twice. You know, do it every 5,000 or so, because one of the things that came out with direct injection is because of all the excess carbon that is building up in the engine and flakes off, it becomes it's grit in your engine that gets into specifically like the timing chain against the cylinder walls and so forth. So that's suspended in your oil, all these little bits of carbon. And that's why so many modern direct injection engines have issues with timing chains, is because it gets in between the links.
Gives you a gear.
It gets in between here and the chain, and you know.
So as the chain lays across the top, it's actually laying higher, as if it's a bigger gear.
That or it has to try and compress that debris, and the debris gets stuck in it and causes them to wear. So we have seen some timing chain issues on the 278 157 motors. They are a triple chain. Right, so there's the main chain, and then there's the secondary chains that go up to the cylinder heads, and those are the ones that generally have an issue. They are single row. They changed them from the roller style, which is what this is. The 157 stuff we can go on and on about. Cams and adjusters on those as well. This is out of a 276. You can see it's a little shorter, but essentially the same thing. This is the 6-cylinder variant. They have the same issue with the adjusters, which no one has come out with a rebuild kit for these. So you do have to get them at full pop retail as far as from the dealer. There are some less expensive aftermarket ones, but we're not sure we trust those, especially for the labor involved to get to them. It's about 20-25 hours to do a full set. Again, that goes back to the integrated cams into the valve covers and cam caps. And there's also just so many parts you have to take off with the direct injection. So you have to take off high pressure fuel pumps, you have to take out all the injectors, and that also adds a lot of one-time use fasteners, which if you want to dig some of those out, they have a bunch of aluminum one-time use fasteners, and Benz is very proud of them. Some of them are like $5 a piece, and you have to buy 12 to 16 of them. So that's them. And could you reuse them? Maybe, but you don't want to take the risk of breaking them, because again, they have a stretch value to them. So you do them to a degree torque and not an actual value. And then on that, still we have cam issues, which this one is out of a bad engine, which I'll kind of pass around. You can see the wear specifically like on this cam lobe, and this one's pretty bad also. So you can see it's worn through the hardened smooth coating, and it's down to the bare metal in there. So this is fine, of course, but on the lobe itself here is what you're looking at.
Yeah. See the roller.
This one's really
goes
bad.
with that cam as well. You can see the galding.
So again, this was out of a 276, but it's essentially the same thing.
Well, that concludes our tech session for the Mercedes-Benz Club of America. If you have any suggestions, please leave it in the comment box. Please like and subscribe. Thank y'all for watching.